Hello, hello. Today we're going to be talking about Invincible. I actually have read the entire comic run. I did so before the series was even announced, surprisingly. To that end, there's going to be some spoilers. I'm not going to be talking about too much, I don't think. But for the sake of safety, please watch until Season 2's ending, and that would be the safest bet. Okay, so this video is going to be sort of about the general way that the story is delivered and sort of comparing it to some few things. Just general thoughts. Me rambling, as usual. If you don't know, this is an art gripe, and it tends to just be me reading things as a podcast over video of me drawing. So, there you go. Anyways, why Debbie, you might be wondering. Because I'm sure that most of you would expect someone like Adam Eve or Duplicate or just anything, basically. Why Debbie? It's because lately I've been thinking a lot about the nature of like emotional strength, character, that sort of thing. Because as I mentioned in a few other videos, I've really been wanting to talk more about the personal things I've been thinking about lately, but I haven't really got a chance to. This is not going to be that video, but this is something that I have been considering. So, Debbie has a lot of reasons to not be in a good state at all. By the end of Season 1 specifically. She's got Nolan, who's left her and done a lot of damage. Her family is constantly in danger, even during the course of Nolan being with her. She's basically single during her marriage. She doesn't have any support going on. She has to resort to drinking during some cases. She's manipulated by Cecil, anyone that could be a source of security in her life. Her son even is gone for months on time. Now she's stuck raising all of her, and so on. Just everything that could be interpreted as a burden or something going on with her life, everything is just being piled on her over and over and over and over again. She's had a pretty rough time of it. So she has every reason to not be in a good state, but she has powered through it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But first, I wanted to mention Invincible is not realistic, certainly. It was an early deconstruction of superheroes. It's still not what if superheroes were real, exactly. It's not. You can't get torn into two pieces, then heal back up and get right back in the game and feel great about things. Invincible doesn't really have that exactly, but there is a lot of people going through things that even if it happened once, you would be done. You would never get back into the career that you were in, no matter what. Invincible is sort of about acclimating to the hero lifestyle and growing up. It succeeds in general because it is a human story, and that's kind of more what I want to talk about. I've been thinking about this a lot lately because of the comparison that some people have been making to the MCU and X-Men 97, specifically lately, because that also came out fairly recently. The gist of it is that the MCU stopped having contained human stories about recognizable characters that are just being people. It started getting, after Infinity War, I think it was, getting really hyper-focused on interlinking properties and things of that nature. People lost interest in characters because they don't know or care about them. It's easy enough to get invested in someone like Iron Man, but when you have sort of the step-up character that's seemingly the B-grade version of that character, then it's less of a thing that you're going to care about, especially if you've already invested everything into the other character. Not going to get into the politics of that, but that is true with any property. Their modern stories really aren't about anything in particular as far as human interest goes. There's often no risk or surprise. Like, you're not going to worry about the characters getting killed or losing anything important to them in most cases. Whereas Invincible is more of a deeply personal story that is still full of surprises. The fact that it is a characters that you don't really recognize but you are still invested in, and the show establishes early on things can happen that will completely end these characters, it gives it sort of that Game of Thrones-esque awareness that anything can happen, that keeps you invested in things that otherwise in most superhero properties you would just not care about. Because, even if something happens to this character, they'll come back later. Don't worry about it. I am often reminded, and I mentioned this before, there is this episode of Star Trek Voyager where effectively Tuvok writes this program about what may have happened on the ship during some specific scenario. The details are important. And someone finds it before it's completed. They think that it's a novel, but it was actually a training program, I think. So to that end, all the characters are acting as realistically as possible, one-to-one to how they would behave in real life. And that's what gets people invested. And then Tom Paris, who is an idiot and a buffoon, he's smart in some ways, but he's very invested in things like old 1950s B films, and he wants things to be exciting. So he takes over writing the ending, because Tuvok says there's no point to writing the ending, because it's no longer relevant, because Tuvok is a Vulcan, and so on. Tom Paris then writes this ridiculous ending where people start betraying one another out of nowhere, and like the captain starts killing members of the crew, and he does this because his assertion is that things need to be exciting. And Tuvok says no, characters must inherently embody their traits. Their actions must be something that flows directly from their characteristics, which, that's what good writing is. This is the joke that the writer's making. When something in a story happens that is completely nonsensical just for the sake of it being a surprise, I tend to think of that as Tom Paris writing as a result. The MCU has that problem, but it also has this problem of... how to describe this? The early Marvel films benefited a lot from people having this perception of superheroes as being not cold, but unapproachable, otherworldly, like heroes. This idea that they're above them in some way. So, whenever you have characters doing Whedonisms, where they become quippy and Captain America going, oh, I recognize that reference, or, turning the camera, I'm always angry, things like that, that takes that high bar of what people think superheroes are and lowers it back down to eye level, and helps to humanize them. And the MCU got a little bit too obsessed with that, to the point where it has become the default personality for everyone, because as far as their marketing is concerned, they recognize, oh, that works, so let's just make that everyone all the time. And whenever you do that, it makes it so that all the situations seem outlandish and not relatable in any way whatsoever. And the people stop being people because they're trying to act too human, which coincidentally makes them completely inhuman and completely unrelatable. That combined with a lot of things. There's so much. I'm not going to analyze the entirety of the MCU. But basically, they're just really screwing things up because the writing consistency is not there. They have a lot of Tom Paris's writing for them. And they have a lot of upper executive meddling, from what I can tell, that is interfering with how you write the stories. But anyways, I wanted to mention all that because in my head, whenever I think about writing, I have always had this scene, I suppose, this idea that I like to call, why are you telling me this? And instead of like a movie or a novel, instead I will take that same story that someone is mentioning. Like if it's a movie, then I translate it into like someone actually telling you about it. Like I'm telling you what happens in Infinity War, just by, physically telling you. You don't get to see anything. You don't get to read it. It's just me rambling. And I imagine two or, however many hunter-gatherers just crowded around a campfire somewhere in the ancient past. Because this is how all stories began, is just people telling each other things. It's the simplest possible way to look at storytelling. And writers tend to forget that. It's like having a conversation. You're not trying to lecture someone about ideas that you have. You're actually conversing with the reader or the watcher. If you start babbling or talking about something stupid, then the conversation falls apart. You have to think about stories in the simplest terms possible. why am I talking about this? Why is it interesting? And if you find that what you're telling people, whether it's the nature of multiverses or whatever, then if you realize, oh, this is probably actually boring. Like, if I was actually telling someone this in real life, they would probably walk away, then you probably shouldn't be doing it. You really have to think about it in terms of conversation. You have to figure out how to deliver information in a way that is structured so that the person that you're telling it to doesn't wander off, think that you're lying, doesn't care, or realizes that you are hyperfixating or being weird or so on. It's a very simple way to look at it, and it's actually more effective than you would think. But think of this way, since we're bringing up the MCU. This mindset of multiverses equals money makes no real sense. Imagine explaining to a caveman, like you're sitting across Mr. Caveman across the fire. You're explaining to Mr. Caveman, Ugh, how there are universes where he's a cowboy, or he clubs a tiger, or he befriends a magic talking pelt or something. And Ugh is like, wow, different universes, neat. And it works. Once. Then after a week of you returning to the campfire and you babbling about, this time you are a millionaire, and this time you are dressed like a spider, and after a while of this, Ugh's like, okay, shut up or me smash. Because eventually you get tired of that shit. There's nothing actually that interesting about it. The idea can be provocative, but after you use it up, it's done. It's done. Just continue to expand and expand ideas and baseline mechanics to a world and like hard magic systems or whatever. It works briefly, but you cannot sustain it. Because why are you telling me this? You're telling me this because, in theory, all stories should be about human experiences and connections. The more personal to the listener, the more appealing it is. Like, whenever you're talking to someone about anything, your day, something that happened to you once, or whatever, if it is something that they can't relate to, then they're probably going to be less interested, less invested in what you're telling them. Or if it's something that they have personally also gone through, then they're probably going to get really excited about it and want to talk to you about it. Especially if it's something that's deeply personal to both of you. That's something that can be the basis of friendships, and that's the core to telling stories to one another, is finding these commonalities, these links, and trying to form bridges across communication. Inherently human beings, we're selfish animals. We're very selfish by nature. It's not necessarily egotistical, I don't mean it in that sense, but we view everything through our own lens. The own lens of our own perception, our own histories, how things have always worked for us. That's how we view the whole world. The more abstract and unrelatable the story, the worse that it gets. If the listener has to stop you and ask, why are you telling me this? You fucked up. The worst possible movies are ones that are one of two things. They're either boring, or as recently, I actually originally just typed boring, but miserable. I can think of one recently. This is of no fault of his, but someone selected a movie to watch recently called Hobo with a Shotgun, and it was not well reviewed, probably for a very good reason. During that film, I felt nothing for it. It's basically just this movie where 95% of the characters are just awful. The dialogue is just, you're trash, you're miserable, I'm gonna kill you. Just everyone just being extremely hateful and miserable to each other the whole time. And then there's a hobo and he gets a gun and there's some scenes of him walking around killing people, or people torturing him, or him torturing them. It's just one of these movies, I've talked about this before, where there are, I think Red Letter Media, because I know Jay is more so like this. There are people, also like people that make slasher films, I also think of them this way. There are people that just really love like the the torture aspect to making films, like there's something funny and comedic about it to them. It's some sort of catharsis. I don't understand it. And this is I'm talking about like the handshake moment of conversation where you link together and you understand each other. This is where I disconnect from them entirely. I don't get it. This excuse to torture people and to show gore, and like there's a few times like someone gets their arm cut apart or their head blown off, and then they sit there shooting the torso and so on. To me, I find no value in that whatsoever. So during the course of the movie, I was the one streaming it, unfortunately, because that was my job that day. I just had to get up and I just left. I just went outside, walked around a while, because I had that reaction. Why are you showing me this? Not to the guy that chose the film. He just misremembered it. It's fine. It was just to the movie maker. Like, why did you make this? Why am I seeing this? This has no value whatsoever. Probably easily one of the worst movies I have ever had the misfortune of seeing. Terrible, terrible film. It got a sequel. So some people are watching it, apparently. Yeah. But that's a personal case of me not linking together with that conversation. Anyways, back to Invincible. Trying to establish that line of thought. Invincible is about Mark, the main character. He's a young kid. He's getting his powers, and he's learning about them for the first time. And by the way, it's often said that in superhero films, the most interesting part is always the part where they're learning how their powers work and figuring that part of it out. And that's because, one, it's approachable, but also it has that hard magic thing of, Ugg listens to multiverses for the first time. He gets really excited. And it is really interesting at first, but it doesn't last too long. This part of it as well. But anyways, he goes through that. And the story really is about him learning how to be a hero, how to balance his personal life, and dealing with trauma. So the learning to be the hero part, not as approachable, but the parts about him learning how to deal with his interpersonal life, how he's communicating with other people, dealing with the relationship with his girlfriend and his father and his mother, and so on, dealing with trauma, the baggage that we had from growing up and so on. That is something everyone has, and that is deeply personal. That's the story. It also goes through other things like respecting people as you help them. Not just helping them, but also realizing that helping can be bad. You have to think about how you help other people. There's one scene where Eve is trying to give people a home and trying to restore some damage that's been done to the city. And someone points out, well, the city is dragging their heels on fixing this one part, this one area right here, and nothing's getting done. And Eve was like, I'll take care of that. And she turns that area into like a little bitty park for the kids to play in. And then later on, it's revealed the reason why the city hadn't done anything to that area is because there's a massive sinkhole under it. And that entire park collapsed and it injured a few people. And she goes into like a depressive state afterwards because she realizes that she was just helping without thinking. She didn't do any research on the area. She didn't ask anyone anything. She just did it because she felt like it was the right thing to do in the moment. She wasn't being wise about it. So Invincible deals with a lot of things that are similar to that. It's a deconstruction of superhero stuff in that sense. Over Discord, we've been watching a lot of TNG lately. We actually just finished it. Something that I think about is there's something in Star Trek called the Prime Directive, which is their order number 1. Of don't interfere with other civilizations if they don't have warp drive yet. And it's just a good general rule. It is not employed very well in the writing of the scripts, though. There's a really bad Season 7 episode. It's not good. It involves Worf's brother, not Kern, not his Klingon brother, not Jeremy, you remember Jeremy, the kid with the ghost mother that he rescued and said, we are brothers now, and then you never see him again? Yeah, good job, Worf. Anyway, it's not him either. His other brother, Nikolai. The Federation wanted to leave this group of people to go extinct because something was happening with their world. There were these massive storms going on. But they were this sapient, human-looking species, human with shit on their face, standard Star Trek stuff. And the Federation's policy is no interference. They don't have warp technology, we can't do anything with them. If their planet is going to kill them, we just have to let it happen. And Nikolai, who has impregnated one of the women, and that gets revealed later, decides, I'm going to ignore the Federation saying that, and I'm going to teleport them on board the holodeck into an area that looks exactly like the caves that we were hiding in, and then we're going to move them in secret. And he does this because it's clear that he's very impulsive and emotional, and that's just how he is. And Worf gets on to him, you've always been like this. You dishonor our family. Just, Worf things. But in the course of the episode, Worf ends up having to pretend to be like his cousin or something, and he has to pretend to have magic powers to control the storms so that they won't notice that the holodeck is going crazy. That way they can quote-unquote travel through the caves that they're not really in, so that they can go to a new area that looks completely different. And what's actually happening is that the Enterprise is moving them to a new planet so that they can be translocated to, another M-class planet so that they can wake up and be like, oh, we got out of the caves. We're in some place we don't recognize. That's unusual. I guess we're just in a different part of the world now. Now, there's so many problems with this. One thing I point out is that this has radically changed their culture already. One day, their culture is going to advance enough that they're going to see that their DNA is completely different from everything else that is on that planet, is one of the first things that I thought of. Another is, just maybe they track the stars already, and they can instantly recognize the stars are completely different. That's strange. There are all sorts of little bitty things that I can't even think of off the top of my head. They're going to be completely different. They're going to notice. The whole idea with the Prime Directive is to not alter the development of cultures to avoid things like religions accidentally developing. Like there's one episode where Picard ends up having to get shot through the heart with an arrow by a proto-Vulcan race because they accidentally rescued someone that noticed that they were spying on them, like researching them. And this was their way of fixing the problem. And as a result, they started worshipping Picard as a god because the guy thought that he was the one that rescued him and so on. This whole thing. And to avoid things like rapid technology influx, like giving warp drive to cavemen is not a good idea. They're not going to be able to acclimate to it. So, what's going to happen in 5,000 years? Are we going to jump forward on the scale of time to that planet and see that those people are now worshipping Worf Jesus because he's the one that had the powers? Are they going to think that they are the apex of all life in the universe because their DNA is unique and they just figured this out? So as a result, they think, well, there's no evidence of us existing on this planet. We must have been placed here uniquely. We're incredibly special. We're probably the most special things in the universe. It completely obliterates their culture. And sure, the idea of we'll just relocate them makes sense, but it's just something that's never explored. And in the Prime Directive episodes, like there's another where Data is trying to rescue this little girl who's like, there's like a volcano holocaust going on that's wiping out everything. It looks nightmarish. And the Enterprise ends up having to use like phaser and torpedo, whatever, to be able to heal the planet so it's not quite as crazy. But before that, they were just shrugging, going, well, what happens, happens. We're not going to interfere. And everything about the Prime Directive has always rubbed me the wrong way as a result of that, because the Federation, it's not even about we can't interact with their culture, because there's not going to be a culture. They're going to die. Like if a planet is going to explode, Prime Directive doesn't matter, because you don't have to worry about it adversely affecting a culture that's not going to exist tomorrow. It's just psychotic. And during that Data episode with the hideous little girl who has like weird long fingers, she's really gross, nasty looking. Anyways, during that episode, they very briefly have a conversation about it. And it's really dissatisfying because it's, I think season 2, because Pulaski is there. And it's taking on almost this sort of spiritual message of we have a place in the universe, and do we have an obligation to interfere, or do we have an obligation to watch? Is it the height of hubris to want to help? I don't like it from that perspective. I prefer a more pragmatic approach to that sort of discussion, and it never happens. In all of Star Trek, it just never happens. They just misinterpret the Prime Directive or ignore it. It's just a narrative writing impediment. It's very frustrating. Anyways, that reminds me of that because of the whole aspect of Invincible. It sometimes has that message of sort of having a Prime Directive in the sense of the characters can help someone and it ends up causing more and more problems because they're just not thinking about the long-term ramifications of what they're doing. So, how do you possibly help people without negative effects? Do you constantly interfere? Do you end up gardening an entire civilization? That's not really an option. Superhero stories don't really linger on how helping people can have negative consequences. It's always had that problem. People in general have this problem. When you help or hurt other people's, it interweaves your life with theirs no matter what, no matter how small that happens to be. It makes you think of also Knights of the Old Republic 2. Kreia, the character who sort of acts as a tutor character for you, constantly complains to you about the idea of weakening other people by giving them your strength, or interweaving your strength with them, so that if you rely on a group of people helping you, that actually just ends up making you weak, because if that group, vanishes or, something happens to them, then your strength is diminished as a result. And it takes on this whole, you're a Jedi, and she's talking about the Force in that case, but the same lesson is still true in real life. Great game, by the way. Check it out. Unlicensed heroing is like being a vigilante cop. In theory, the whole idea with cops is that society agrees you're qualified. So whenever you go in to try to de-escalate a situation as a police officer, in theory, you're qualified to do that because you've been trained to do it. Whereas if you're just some guy that's like, I'm going to do the right thing, I'm going to run in there and I'm going to talk this guy off the ledge, or I'm going to save this kid, or so on, you aren't qualified. Society has not agreed that you should be doing that. So as a result, you can do that, but you can still be sued or held accountable for causing harm while trying to be helpful. If it works out, great. If it doesn't, you're going to be facing a lot of consequences. It reminds me a lot of this good old boys mentality of doing the right thing no matter what. That was really prevalent whenever I was younger. In the 1980s, there were a lot of... If you ever wonder where this mentality comes from, it comes from this. It is a very American attitude. You can find it very prevalently in old 80s action films. They have really obvious bad guys who do hyper evil things. Like running around, like just a mishmash of... it was usually a mishmash of different ethnicities because it didn't really matter about the messaging. They're just like, yeah, just bring in everyone. Just put them in leather jackets and jean jackets and give them mohawks or something so that they look like they're on the fringes of society, and have them whip around knives and go, we're gonna cut you up and give us all your money, man. Like, just really overt evil things. The more evil that they can make them, the better. And that was all an excuse so that the hero had a reason to shoot them. That way you didn't have to feel bad about it. There was no gray area whatsoever. Just really obvious. Death Wish is a great example of this. Of a guy just walking around, and then he's accosted by people. He was minding his own business, but they just come out like, we're evil, we're gonna stab and shoot you, and we're gonna rape your dog, and just all horrible things. It was the 1980s. Just horrible things were always happening to everyone. And of course, Mr. Deathwish himself, whatever his name is, Pierce, no, not Pierce, Charles Bronson. I always call him Pierce Bronson. Definitely different people. Charles Bronson just guns all of them down, and at the very end of the movie, it's just like bad men flowing out of buildings, just getting gunned down one after the other. And even all the people in the neighborhood are all just gathered together with their own guns, and everyone's just having a good time just mowing down all the bad men. And the bad men die in hilarious ways. And it's very cathartic. It's fun. You're not supposed to take it that seriously. But when a whole generation of people are raised on things like that, cowboys, gunning down bad men, later, space aliens, and whatever the eras of cinema are, when everything is portrayed as just good man versus complete, total, absolute bad, it does gestate this idea that sometimes you just need to ignore the gray areas of life and just do the right thing, which is an admirable sentiment, but it's not how the world works. So if you ever wondered where is this American mentality coming from, why are they the way that they are, it's because people think this way. They want to think about things in terms of the simplest way possible. So whenever it comes to things like transgender issues, for example, has been a thing in the past couple of years. It's historically been a thing, of course, but as far as political stuff goes, in the past couple of years, it's been more the discourse of things. People want to try to simplify things and be like, well, no, that's just overcomplicated nonsense. The world is simple because I want it to be. It fits in this box. Things that don't go in my box that I feel comfortable about are bad. And that's how people process things. And it's not healthy, but this is how things are in America sometimes. Anyways, if you're a vigilante superhero, you run into that problem a lot if you're in a deconstructed, Invincible style story. Some of the knee-jerk reaction to that sometimes, or has been, especially in the 2000s, was to forego having the obvious good versus obvious bad and go with morally gray characters that were honestly just as annoying. Lately we watched some Constantine stuff, like the old Keanu Reeves one, which was really horribly boring, terrible movie. And some of the animated films involving Constantine, there were a couple of those. Both of those were kind of terrible. And honestly, Constantine just comes across as being kind of boring, an asshole, really self-involved, and not terribly interesting, not even like entertaining, just kind of a stupid asshole. And I was told that supposedly there are a couple of good Constantine comics that were really early on in his run, but otherwise, usually all of his stuff is considered to be bad, which made me wonder, why is he popular then? But anyways, this is one example I thought of off the top of my head. Morally gray characters tend to have this problem, because actual moral grayness isn't about being an asshole or being a hero that on the side will steal a TV or like a gray Jedi. People throw fits about gray Jedi because as far as how the Force works, it's not about light and dark. Like, it's not a balance of having light and dark. Dark is considered to just be like a total cancer. It's something that shouldn't exist at all. Whereas the actual gray area is people that are in the light, but they're just not interpreting it correctly. They have different viewpoints of how it should work, and I'm not going to get into all that, but because I actually sometimes think about doing an entire video about that that's actually scripted. But anyways, the actual gray area is doing the right thing, but having consequences that are hard to process. Like Mark at one point rescues an old woman from being attacked by some space aliens or something, and he ends up inadvertently like breaking her arms and causing a lot of harm to her body, and she ends up dying as a result. She would have died in the process of being attacked, but him rescuing her kind of just prolonged that feeling. A personal experience that I had, and you probably won't want to hear this, I guess, in hindsight, but I think I may have mentioned this at one point, but some of my family members used to raise dogs, and then they sold all of them, and one of them had a litter of puppies. And the way that dog breeding works, and it's horrible, there's one of the reasons why they got out of it, because it is horrible, is they were not like licensed or anything puppies, and they didn't want to have a slow turnaround on breeding the dog. So they're just like, well, we'll just leave them. And they just left them to die. Or that was what was going to happen, excuse me. But they ended up taking the puppies with them, I think, because I think one of my relatives told them, no, you need to take them. But one of them got left behind. And I found that dog, and no one cared. Like, you left this one, and they didn't want to come back. No one cared about it. So I ended up trying to save this newborn puppy, trying to feed it and so on, but it just was not in good health. And I was in a really bad state at the time. This is not a pleasant memory for me. And I remember this little puppy like wailing in some sort of pain, because I guess I don't know what happened to it. Like, it was having a little tiny heart attack or something, for all I know. I'm not sure. But I took it to the vet, and because it was just barely surviving, I had to do like little CPR on it, and they said that they don't know if they can do anything about it, so I received no help from them. Took it home, same thing happened again. I tried to do CPR on it, and it ended up dying, of course. And in the end, I felt like I just prolonged its suffering, so I felt terrible. I was trying to do the right thing. I don't know if I did. To me, that's like a moral gray. It's not necessarily moral gray. In that case, it's more just a horrible thing that happened, but there's gray in that. Of, why did I do this? Was the right thing to do? I don't know how to process that. And to me, that's what that gray area is. It's this inability to process things as being right or wrong. Not necessarily the choice of whether something is right or wrong, or a hero stealing a turkey or whatever. It's that difficulty in processing. It can also be sometimes, in hindsight, there was a better option at the time, but you had no way of knowing about it. So the processing is also part of making the best decision in the moment you possibly could have made, and trying not to blame yourself for not, in hindsight, going, oh, I could have done this, it would have been so easy, that would have been the perfect solution. That's part of it as well. To me, exploring things like that is part of good writing. But I digress. A good example actually is Mark and Amber's relationship. In Season 1, they kind of mishandled Amber. I'm not going to go into that. Season 2, she's much better. They did rectify that to some degree. In the show, it is different than the comics. I'm not going to go into what happened in the comics, not important. But both of those outcomes on how their relationship ends are both realistic and mature ways of dealing with their differences. Neither one of them is Tom Paris writing, where just something stupid happens for the sake of it being surprising. The things that are happening to them are realistic for the world that they live in. But neither one of those situations devolves into them just screaming at each other and hating each other, or one being abusive, or anything like that. It's just a very healthy breakup of both of them having an honest admission of both of their needs and compatibility, and eventually just recognizing we need to separate. That would be the healthiest thing for both of us. And both of them leave as friends. It's a really great, healthy way of examining a relationship and how it can end amicably and why it was healthy to do so. And that's true in the comics and the show. The show is... They're both very different, I'll say it that way. If you're interested, go check it out in the comics. In the comics, Amber is sort of a ditzy blonde lady. She's different. It's very different. I would say I probably prefer the show version, though. But in Invincible, the characters are growing, but they stay the same. This is kind of a common running problem as well. Characters will sometimes go through radical changes and they'll end up being completely different. Humans don't really do that. Humans do change, but it's more that we move things around in such a way that we can reprocess things a little bit better, and we do slowly improve, but that's a process that can take an entire lifetime. There's no moment of someone being a perfectly ordinary, stable person, and then just their girlfriend gets murdered, and now they're a supervillain. Things like that can, by perception, seem to happen, but there's always a through line to their personality, so that something like that was always there, so that the supervillain or whatever aspect that you're seeing to them is an exaggerated version of something that was always present. And good writing for characters that are villains, or even heroes, always try to show you those things. You always see the small until it becomes the big thing. Take Rex, for example. Rex Explode. He's a loudmouth idiot. And eventually he does get better, and he realizes, oh, I've been treating all the women in my life terribly. I'm a terrible person. But afterwards, he's still him. Like, he doesn't suddenly become like a cliche, like a Tibetan monk or something. It's like, I'm at one with myself. I'm going to give good advice to everyone now. I've completely changed. No, he's still himself. He's improved, but he's still himself. That's good writing. Cecil is evil in the sense that he does everything he does to protect and control everything. Like, he's trying his best to protect humanity, protect the Earth, and control everything around him to ensure the longevity of the species. But that takes him down a lot of dark roads, and it will take him down even darker roads in the future, without any spoilers. But he's still a good character, because you can see that he's trying to do it through a sense of good. And through characters like Cecil, you can see how authoritarians begin from this desire to control their environment. And, you'll see more of that later with even more characters. I've talked about this in past videos, but as I've gotten older, I see things as more through that lens of the world is people trying to control their environment or situations so that they don't feel fear, or so that they can resist knowing that they're weak. My dad, for example, controlled everything that he could. He was a very controlling person. He devolved into conspiracy theories as he got older, because he can't control the world. He, can't control reality itself, just his local environment. So trying to see things through an understandable tiny box, once again, where this is the way the world works. If I don't understand it, it goes in the conspiracy box. Because the government is doing it. Like, some all-powerful, invisible, rich people are doing things to specifically harm me. Like, government people are watching me through my computer. It's a very simplified way of trying to process things around you. It was his way of controlling reality, and the only way that he could. Me personally, I went through a lot of emotional neglect and things like that, and as a result, I bottled all of my emotions, and that was my way of controlling things. Because I was raised being ignored, basically, so as a result, I processed that as my feelings are invalid. They are not important. So my way of dealing with that was just bottle all of them up. Shut out the world, wall myself up, sit alone in my room, don't interact with anyone else, because my feelings don't matter, I don't matter. I'm just going to try to get by on as little as possible. I controlled my reality in the best way that I possibly could. Everything comes down to this, for me, this way I view things. Everything comes down to this way of trying to control things by changing how you can locally process it. Trying to make yourself safe, trying to make the people around you that you care about safe, and the only way that you can, and sometimes that takes you down some dark roads. Good writing for characters, I think, explores things through that sort of lens. Where even if they're doing something that's bad or good, you're processing it on that deeply personal level. That brings me to Viltrumites themselves. In the show, if you don't know, there are Viltrumites that are basically like a race of Superman, like Superman the character. They have that sort of general power set. No laser vision, though. No cold breath or anything like that. They're just very strong. They can fly, and they're very strong, basically. And they're very resilient, but not so resilient that they can avoid being torn in half or having their guts spill out and so on. It's a very violent show in that sense. I'll tell you what, the hobo with a shotgun thing made me think of this. If the show was live action and it still had that level of violence, I probably wouldn't watch it. It would bother me too much. I don't like watching stuff like that. In animated form, it's much easier to process it because it's animated. I'll say that. Because I think that they're trying to work on a live-action version, and I don't know if that's going to translate well. Anyways, this is side tangent. Viltrumites have that really strong power set. They're just kind of better than everyone else. In the whole galaxy, they are the strongest species. Minus like one or two other things, maybe. That's a minor plot point, though. like Ragnar's or whatever. I know in like some material that was released after the comic came out, I think. I'm too vague on this. Someone could probably correct me in the comments. It was implied that Viltrumites were actually like modified humans, maybe. Something about their atoms being altered in some way, or they're shrunk, or I don't know what it is. There's something about it. There was some sort of explanation that they're basically just people that have been modified in some particular way of pseudoscience. It doesn't really matter. Point being is that in almost every way that you conceive of, they are just people. They're human beings. They look like human beings. They're just very absurdly strong. And I mention that because it's important to crouch that in the idea that they are still people. They're not so alien that they are immutable in some way. The power set doesn't really matter too much. The point of them is that they are control, what I'm talking about. They are trying to control everything around them. The whole universe. They have their own empire where they're trying to regulate all the lesser species and raise them up to be better. And so that's their what they're preaching anyways, because they want to control everything around them. Their culture, if you look at their culture, is really toxic and obsessed with power and almost nothing else. No Viltrumite is raised with love and attentiveness. None of them. All of their worth stems from this idea of being powerful and invulnerable. Whenever they sort of work like Saiyans in a sense, that if you survive something, then you're going to get stronger. So as long as your heart isn't damaged or something, if you get torn in two, you lose a limb, you can eventually regrow it. Like even Mark can regrow teeth, thank goodness. And whatever you do, then they get physically stronger. So the strongest Viltrumites are usually the ones, and you also get stronger over time. So the strongest ones tend to be the ones that are the most violent, that have gotten into the most trouble, that have been the most injured, and are also the oldest. So if Mark, who is very young, he's just a kid, even by human standards, has to fight someone that's 6,000 years old, he's at a severe disadvantage. He's way weaker than they are. So in terms of all their powers and everything, yes, they're incredibly powerful. They're unapproachable. You can't really fight them. But they do have one weakness, and that weakness is their humanity. I'm not going to spoil things that come after Season 2. But as far as like Nolan is concerned, when he is shown love and care, he just completely breaks down. And this is true of Viltrumites in general, is if they're exposed to humanity, then it's like exposing an actual person that... Let's take like someone that's raised in like a... Because Viltrumites are like toxic masculinity, the species. Like all that stuff I was talking about earlier, like Death Wish, gunning down people, handling everything with violence, that's them. Like everything is processed through a lens of controlling everything through violence and fear. And if you are weak, you have no value. If you show emotions, you have no value. Just everything negative in that sense. If you take someone in real life that's like that, and they've just been abused their entire lives and taught having feelings is bad, you need to be strong, you need to be able to protect everyone around you, but your internal monologue that you have, like the dialogue you have with yourself in your head does not matter, your emotions don't matter, you don't matter at all. If you show them even a modicum of love and care, then they almost completely break down. Because the moment that they're shown even a modicum of that, then it just shatters everything about them. All those walls that they've been erecting, because I went through this as well, all those walls that they erect slowly get broken down, and because everything about who they are is that control, that protection, that self-protection of trying to wall themselves off and protect everything about themselves, while also protecting the world around them and controlling the world around them. Sometimes they're just reduced to a puddle because they've never been shown any love or affection at all. And that's what happened with Nolan. They're all starved internally for this care and love that they've never been shown. They just didn't know it because it's not in their culture. With Nolan is very old, at least thousands of years old, and this moment in time of him raising Mark was just like a speck to him, like a little flicker. But even that was enough for him to get pulled enough out of that culture for him to start to process his own humanity. And that's their weakness. So, with Nolan, after he flees Earth, effectively, into season 1, he feels this deep guilt and regret, and also love, that he can't process, because he was raised in this culture for thousands of years. He doesn't understand what he's even feeling. So whenever he goes to that bug planet with his bug wife, he projects onto them. You might wonder, why does he care about these bug people? He's projecting. He doesn't know how to process, so whenever this comes up, these bug people that are disposable, like they live very short lives. It's even more exaggerated than humans, compared to Viltrumites. He has this rebound relationship with one of them, and he tries to rule over their culture because they offer it to him, in the most positive way that he possibly can, because that's his coping mechanism. He's trying his best to process and cope with what he's done on Earth, and he's doing it through these bug people that he sees as being disposable. Because of his upbringing as a Viltrumite. But even then, he learns to love and care for them, and that really bothers him. So whenever the Viltrumites show up and start killing all the bug people around him, he's screaming at Mark, like, why do I care about them? Like, why is this happening to me? He doesn't understand it. He has no way of processing it, because internally he's broken, because their entire culture is broken. Assuming he heals and he comes back to Earth at some point, it would be important for all the other characters that, welcome him back, that have to welcome him back, that greet him. Like, they can't kill him, really. They have to process and understand what he was. What happened to him? Why did he do the things that he did? But it's important for them to understand that, but at the same time, it's really hard to forgive what he did. And in the show, it's almost completely unforgivable. In the comics, what he did was not as bad as what he did in the show. And at first, I wasn't too happy about that, but then I thought about it. Exaggerating them is actually probably better narratively, because then it 100% frames Nolan as being unforgivable. Like, it frames what Viltrumite culture is as being completely unforgivable. Whereas before, in the comics, it was easier to welcome him back to Earth because, he didn't really kill much of anyone. I think, I don't know, it's been a while since I've read it, but there's no train scene, for example. There's like one or two examples of him trying to demonstrate that human life has no value to Mark, but that's it. Then he leaves after their fight together. So it's much easier, like, he still did bad things, but it's much easier to sort of just sweep it off to the side. Especially since the people that he killed are not people that we knew as characters, so you can mentally go, well, it didn't matter. By making it more exaggerated, it makes it very clear, I don't think he can come back. Viltrumites cannot be this way. It is not something that is acceptable in any way whatsoever. So it's much more effective. I actually like that change now. It also makes it much more clear that this is trauma. He is the way that he is because of a trauma that he doesn't even understand. It becomes a hard point of discussion. You have to discuss it. It has to be something that is evaluated instead of something that is just swept to the side. So, in the show, you can see him getting furious at himself, hating himself, because it is sinking in, and he doesn't want it to sink in, how much he hates his own culture, and he slowly realizes how important love and care is. And there's even a point at the end of this season, season 2, where he just realizes, I think I miss my wife. Because it's just that alien to him. The idea of, I love my wife and I miss her. And I want to be around her. I don't understand these things. Why would I? because the only thing that matters is power and control and doing your service to the Empire and so on. The moment that he has to process himself as being a person, then all of that just washes away, because inherently that is what we are. We cannot deny our own biology. You can't raise someone in that culture and then just go, well, that's what they are now. We fix them. That is always going to be inside all of us, that humanity. So whenever it is breached, those walls that we have, that of course is going to present itself, and it's going to completely break down. That's what Invincible is about, and that's why it succeeds in the face of something like the MCU, because it's using the hero framework to tell a very human story. Sci-fi and fantasy are best used to tell stories that realistic fiction cannot tell. When it comes to telling stories about the human condition, of course you can use fiction to tell any sort of stories, but sci-fi and fantasy have a way of exaggerating that. They're not just about escapism. Like, sci-fi and fantasy isn't just about, like, cool robots and magic and so on. They serve very important functions to exaggerate reality. Since I was talking about TNG, there's an episode of The Next Generation called Measure of a Man, very famous episode. I think it's season 2. Like, it's very surprisingly good for a season 2 episode. If you ever wondered where to start with Star Trek, you might want to start with either 2 or 3. Probably 3 reliably. Because not all the episodes are good that early on. 1's pretty bad. Anyways, Measure of a Man is about a scientist showing up that wants to make more androids. And Data is the only android in existence. He's, a robot. He's, an artificial person. He wants to take Data and effectively destroy him, break him down, and try to figure out how exactly he's constructed so that he can figure out how to make more Datas. But it's also sort of implied that the scientist doesn't really know what he's doing, and he's not a dumbass, but, he clearly is wanting to use Data as a way to propel his own career forward. And he doesn't care about Data as a person. Whereas, of course, all the people that have been around Data this entire time, Captain Picard and Riker and Troy and so on, Geordi, all of them know Data as a friend. He's a person. They're aware of that. So the entire episode is about trying to establish through trial, like he's on trial effectively, there's a hearing, to determine whether Data is property or a person. Like, is he just a device someone made that the Federation owns so they can do whatever they want with him, or does he have his own will? There's even the scientist at one point, I think he has the quote of, if he was a toaster on wheels, we wouldn't be having this conversation. No one would care. So the episode is about, how do you define what consciousness is? What is life? And that's where the sci-fi element comes in. You can have a story like that, but it's much more difficult than it is with something that is couched in fantasy. At one point, Picard is talking to Whoopi Goldberg's character of Guinan, and she is having a very kind of tongue-in-cheek conversation with him that escalates to the point where he realizes, oh, what you're discussing is slavery. What we're actually doing here is we're having a trial about enslaving Data, like enslaving a class of people. That's what this is an issue of. It's not really about him being a person. I know that he's a person. So in this case, it's the Federation trying to control Data as being a second-class person in order to exploit him, to rule over him as being property when it suits them, and then treating him as a person when it suits them. And this happens like 2 or 3 times in the series. Later on, Data makes a daughter named Lol, who is, just another android that ends up exceeding him in some ways, but I'm not going to spoil the ending, but an admiral comes in and says, we want to take Data's daughter away from him. Because effectively, you get the impression of, because they want him, or they want Lol, his daughter, they want her. So Data is like, well, I can go with her, and they say, no, we don't need both of you together in the same place anymore, it's too dangerous. They come up with all sorts of excuses, but you can see that the actual reason is that they just really want to possess Lol, because it's a shiny new toy and they really like this new technology. And they want to protect and control that technology. And later on, this actually happens again in Voyager, where they come up with the ability to use holograms anywhere that they want to. And they start using all the old EMHs after they become invalidated after the EMH2 comes out as like slave labor in mines. So they do it again. The Federation, as good as they are, keeps making the same mistake and keeps enslaving things that are sapient. Point being, you can have a story that's about, slavery or will and defining what a person is and stuff like that in normal fiction, like completely realistic fiction. But you can't exaggerate them and distance them without the fantasy elements. Having that character be an android exaggerates the elements that go into it so that you can actually break it down and exaggerate it from a distance. Using fantasy, you can distance people from the reality of something without diminishing the message. Baggage comes with issues, but if it's an imaginary fictional issue, you can create parallels to real life. And Star Trek specifically has gotten in trouble recently because the CBS version of Star Trek doesn't understand this. In Discovery, they were making really ham-fisted, extremely literal comparisons to things that were happening in real life by actually going back in time and pointing at things that were happening in, like, Los Angeles and going, look, it's bad. Those are bad things. And people did not appreciate that, even people that were on their side, because it was so ham-fisted and preachy and inane. It was just presented in the stupidest way possible. You don't do it that way. The benefit of writing in Star Trek or Invincible, whatever, is that you can create parallels that are not necessarily literal. That way you can analyze every element of what the arguments are. A great example of this is Orville. Orville is like a inheritor, spiritual successor to TNG, because at the time, CBS was refusing to make proper Star Trek. They were just making this angry Star Trek where everyone was drunk and screaming at each other, and it was filled with hyper-violence. It's just fucking stupid. Some people like that. If you like it, you're wrong. Anyways, Orville is like a spiritual successor to TNG specifically. The Moclans. The Moclans are an all-male race because at some point in their history they had some sort of huge disaster on their planet. And the only way that they could figure out to rectify the problem was ensuring that males could give birth, or they could artificially like make more people, it's not well described, but you get the impression that this is something that happened a long time ago, and now it is cultural. So at this point, Moclans are all male, and ever so often they do have a female that is born, but whenever they discover that, they force them into transgender surgery at birth to quote-unquote fix them so that they are male. Some still identify as women even after the surgery as they grow up because their biology starts asserting itself, and they just feel off about it and they don't know why. So they'll start to identify more with like alien women because they recognize something there and they don't understand and they can't process what's going on. A lot is going on with this. It's not a one-to-one to real-life transgender issues. In this case, for example, the conservatives are the ones that are actually forcing these transgender surgeries onto people in order to conserve their own values. It is brought up that because their culture is so obscenely conservative, and it had to be in order to survive, as far as the setting goes, it is acknowledged that if you allow them to just stay female, then there's going to be so much cultural pressure placed on them that their life is just going to be a living hell from that point forward. And of course, it's naturally brought up, well, you don't need to abuse the people in order to try to save them from the culture that's abusing them, and so on. But even then, some of the children escape that surgery and stay female. One woman is revealed to be a famous cultural contributor without anyone knowing their identity, to prove the point of we still contribute, we can still be happy. And some go through that surgery and end up being normalized to the culture anyways. That is, even if they're aware that they're originally born female, then they're fine with it. They acclimate. While others don't at all. There's a good example of that. The main character, well, not the main character, one of the main characters, Bortus, has a mate, as they put it, named Clyden. And Bortus is fairly conservative at the very start and slowly moves away from that. Clyden is ultra conservative, very hardcore conservative. And whenever he came on board the ship, he didn't know, Clyden, that he was born originally as a female, and does not tell anyone this. But the second that an alien doctor gets a hold of him for their physicals, all the Moclan doctors just lied to him and, didn't tell him anything about this. Whereas the alien doctors immediately pointed out, oh no, you used to be female. Because that cultural aspect did not matter to them. In this case of their relationship, they have a kid. The main character, Bortus, was the quote-unquote mother, in the sense that Bortus was the one that laid the egg. But they don't have a male-female sort of relationship. It's not as though one of them takes on the female role or anything like that. They're both presented as being males, and they both identify as being male. Clyden, I guess, has a little bit more of a feminine sort of a tone to him, I suppose, if anything at all. But yeah, they both present as being male. It's not as though the show is trying to sneak in the idea that, well, always one of them is always female, or anything like that. So it also includes that element of, gay marriage, while at the same time normalizing it, without it being presented as being an issue for their culture anyways, while also combining it with the conservative elements. So, point being, it is not one-to-one to reality in any way. It's sort of a mishmash of different concepts and things that we would consider to be issues that for them, because they're alien, is not an issue in any way whatsoever. The actual way that the show presents it as being, not a problem, but like a statement or an exploration of politics and issues, is people keep talking around the characters as though this is a completely cultural and legislative issue that is being polluted by, our Terran philosophies and sensibilities. Like it's a cultural sort of attack in a sense. But the show makes it clear this is a statement about identity and how the evil that is stemming from this is people trying to control your identity, whatever your identity happens to be. Now, there's a whole lot I could go into as far as discussing that point and how it relates to our real-world stuff and so on. But that's my point, is that it's not clean, it's not one-to-one, it is fantasy. And the advantage of fantasy is being able to explore an issue, explore the points of those issues, by using completely foreign ideas that are just foreign enough, but relatable enough, that you can project what you want onto it, and then identify that it makes no sense because it is projection, and it doesn't make sense in their situation. That's the advantage of fantasy and sci-fi as tools in fiction. It's kind of generally how I think about my own internal, just exploration of issues as well. I tend to take pieces out of things and go, well, if I remove this element of it, is it still important to me? Or if I add this, is that something that would upset me? If I take this away, is that something that's going to be integral to me being able to enjoy it, and so on? It's just a means of actually identifying what the core to how you think happens to be. So, bringing it all the way back around, I chose Debbie because of how strong she happens to be. Because of the nature of the sci-fi and fantasy elements of making a superhero genre, combining as tools in order to demonstrate through characters such as Debbie, most of the characters, but Debbie especially, where that strength happens to come from. Now, strong female characters are contentious these days for a lot of reasons, and they have been honestly since like the late 90s or so. A lot of the times they come across as being obnoxious for the same reason that, gray morality, as I mentioned before, comes across as being obnoxious sometimes. Because people get it wrong. Like, as far as like gray morality goes, sometimes that means asshole. And for strong female characters, sometimes when people write them, they come across as just being assholes. They're not strong, they're just, rude and contentious. So often, represented minorities or underprivileged people that are shown in these shows as being strong come across as just being portrayed as being invulnerable, or they're used to humiliate people that are in more traditionally stronger positions. Which is not really character, it's just, an attack. It's something that is launched from a position of weakness, which just undermines the point of actually representing those people that are underrepresented. So, I've seen this a lot. A lot of LGBT-style characters in shows sometimes have almost no personality because the writers are just very scared of showing them having a negative trait. The characters I'm usually the happiest with are the ones that are still strong characters, and they, do the right thing, or they're shown to be brave, and so on. But they also have negative traits that make them more relatable and more human. The ones that I don't like at all is whenever they're just, presented as being an all good to the point where they seem vanilla or like they're living rice cakes. They just exist. They're paintings or idealized concepts or invulnerable idols in some cases. People like to refer back, usually as an example, like counterexample, to Ripley or Sarah Connor as being ideal, strong female characters. And, I kind of agree with that. They're very strong, successful female characters. I've always liked them. A recent example... I'll give you some recent bad examples that are probably still on people's minds. Let's take Captain Marvel, for example, from the MCU. Captain Marvel usually seems very wooden and unlikable, and full of hate. She just seems like she hates everything around her and is just bothered constantly with having to be a hero. And part of that is her character. She's sort of like that in the comics to some minor degree. But it's not a good example of a strong female character. Or take, for example, Velma. The Velma show that everyone despised. But they hate watching it, and now it got a second season, apparently. It seems more like the creator is projecting herself onto Velma and writing herself in the role, and Velma's not really even part of it. So that character of quote-unquote Velma comes across more like it's the creator thinly veiling or trying to frame how much she hates certain people and cultures and so on as being quirky humor. I think the best way I could describe it is it's not strength, it's venomous. It's an attempt to weaken other people more than actually display how strong you happen to be. So, Connor and Ripley, in this case, fight, but they still have weaknesses and they still struggle, and those struggles are both physical and mental at times. But they still succeed, and we want to see them succeed because we also like them, both for their strength and because of their character and because of their personalities. They're people. That's generally what it comes down to whenever you're writing characters. They just need to be relatable people that you like and you want to see them succeed. And it's good whenever they succeed by having agency and deciding this is what I need to do, and then they follow through, and even if that plan falls apart in some degree, then they still succeed in the end. And it's as a result of what they have done. It's not because someone rescued them from the situation. And it feels good whenever they heal and lead better lives as a result. Which would have been nice if the sequels had not happened. But that's another story. As I get older, I find that I admire people more and more that are like my mother and grandmother. They're, neither one of them is perfect, but I recognize how much that they have put up with, especially since, as I've gotten older, I've had to go through a lot myself, and I can only imagine what they've had to go through having lived longer lives, and now they have less of a support network as a result, because they've gotten older and a lot of people are just out of their lives now for various reasons. I have personally witnessed my mother dealing with a lot, and as a result I worry about her being isolated or not enjoying herself and so on. But she's doing okay, though, from what she says. It is often the duty of parents to put on a good face, so that's the reason why I probably worry about her more than I probably should. But she spends a lot of time still helping us, helping her children. And whenever he was alive, she devoted almost everything to her husband. To her detriment, I will say. Adults often, in focusing on their families, end up losing support around them. Being a parent, especially a solo parent, is very isolating and I'm sure incredibly terrifying, because there's nothing to fall back on, and this person is completely depending on you. Debbie probably thought that she won the lottery with Nolan. He's this very handsome, very well-built alien, sure, superpowered man, just looks like a human being, so there's no weirdness about him looking like a bug creature or anything like that. But because he was a hero, he was away most of the time. And she lacked having support from friends, and her entire life, her family, her husband as well, were in constant threat of danger from something because of the nature of his work. And also, at the same time, because they had secret identities, she couldn't tell anyone about it. They had to live this front that he was a writer, and that their money was just coming in from somewhere. Now, for her, Nolan was very alien. Like, he didn't really understand culture. She had to teach him a lot of things, which I'm sure was fun and is very exciting, but at the same time, he's very inhuman as a result. And sometimes Nolan was very frightening because of his upbringing, and even though he was trying to impersonate the role of a good, clean-cut superhero, it still came through sometimes, and that was, frightening. But, she had nowhere to turn. It reminds me of this, no, it wasn't Bill Burr. I think it was Louis C.K. Neither one of those are great choices. But there was this joke that they were doing in one of their stand-up routines about the differences between dating as a man and a woman, and how much more bravery it takes for a woman, especially in the case of, well, both of them. Louis C.K., that joke didn't quite age so great, did it? But I think the comparison was to men as bears or some other giant wild animal, of the woman assuming, well, I hope this one's okay, like just dating the worst possible thing, something that can kill you. And I think he made some joke about how she hops in the car and asks, "Where are we going?" And the man responds, "Well, statistically to your death." And that's what it feels like sometimes, I'm sure, as a woman. You have to date them if you're attracted to men, but they're also the source of most violence in the world. So whenever I think of Debbie marrying someone like Nolan, who is the strongest person that has ever existed as far as Earth is concerned, it must be exciting but a nightmare in the back of your mind, because there's always that background thought of, what if? So whenever you flash forward and it turns out, yes, that is exactly what he was. He betrays the whole planet. He kills tons of people. He invalidates their whole life together. He calls her a pet to their son. He tries to kill their son, her son, and then leaves without dying, which sounds a little bit strange, but the fact that he didn't die means that there's not much resolution. It's just left in limbo. So she's in this horrible state where everything about her life was a lie. It's been left up in the air. She has to look at an analog to her husband's face in the face of her child every single day of her life. He eventually sends back another son with her existing son to raise that child, the child of him and another woman who was a bug creature. And she dips into hard drinking, and whenever she reaches out for support networks, it comes back to her, because the very moment that she's able to actually open up and admit, that was my husband, he did all this, and he did this to you, then of course she's met immediately not with acceptance of and understanding of, oh, that is so awful, I can't believe that happened to you as it well happened to the rest of us. It's turned back on her and she's hated as a result, so she can't even reach out her hand for help. So she ends up having no real support besides one of her husband's friends, which is another element of fear and resentment, I'm sure. So, the more you think about it, it's just a nightmare for Debbie. She has absolutely every right to shut down, to have PTSD, to just have her life completely devolve into chaos or the worst possible options. In the writing of this, not the writing, I have like little bitty notes, but you know what I mean. In the preparation for this, I was looking up reasons for why PTSD occurs, and because some people don't get it, even though they're experiencing the same exact trauma. And I started wondering about it. And some of the reasons are early emotional trauma from whenever you're a kid, very sustained trauma, even if you have a good childhood. If you're going through a sustained trauma as an adult, then that increases the odds. Having a personality that lends itself to self-blame, and of course existing mental illnesses also contribute as well, and so on. If you have a vocation like being a police officer, firefighter, and so on, that involves having constant, unrelenting stress, then that also plays a major contributing factor. Having no strong support network, like not having friends and just family and so on that are able to support you and understand what you're going through, that contributes a great deal while you're going through trauma. Also, while you're going through whatever that trauma happens to be, if you're also going through even more loss, like losing a home, deaths in the family, etc., that contributes even more. And as I read this, I was thinking about like my troubles that I was having a few years ago. I went through very similar issues. I was going through a deep trauma. I was losing a lot of my support network. I didn't have any friends at that time. I had lost my father. There was a lot of like financial struggles. I felt like I was losing my business and so on. Just a lot of things were going on. I was going through all sorts of major losses all at the same time. Had self-blame. COVID was happening as well. Just everything that could go wrong was going wrong. As a result, I could actually feel my brain like start changing, the way that I think, the way that I process information. And as a result, I'm not quite sure if I'll ever be the same. I probably won't be. This is just a different version of what I am now. And as a result, I've had to reprocess that as this is just a new chapter in my life. I'm a different person as a result. I have new things that I have to adapt to and deal with, and I'll do that. I'll reprocess. So part of this is my projection onto Debbie. Debbie is powerful, strong, not because, she's an asshole and she treats white males with disrespect or whatever. And also not because she brushed off PTSD or because she can punch through people or whatever. It's not for overt signs of strength. It's not even because she's a mother. Her strength comes from herself, her self-actualization. She chose to live and to find new meaning and to protect other people. When she and Oliver at the end of Season 2 are getting attacked, her arm gets broken in an Invincible fashion, the most graphic possible way. In those moments, she's not screaming for help. She's trying to reassure Oliver, the other child of her husband that betrayed her and had this child with another woman. She wakes up and immediately wants to know afterwards, after the attack, after she has been rescued, where is Oliver? That's the first thing on her mind. A lot hinges on control in life, like I've been mentioning. A lot of evil stems from trying to control the world and trying to control your environment and trying to control other people. Depression and things of that ilk often stem from having no sense of control over your life, feeling helpless, feeling like you have absolutely no direction, no accomplishments, and no power to make things in your life better. Debbie is strong for not succumbing to the lack of external worth. She was called a pet by her husband. That must have been devastating, to have the strongest man in the world, the man that you love, that you have put your complete trust in, refer to you as basically being trash, that he never actually cared about. And she recovered from that. Like, it did hurt, but her strength didn't come from it rolling off of her and her not caring. It came from her healing from it. Like I said, she's strong for choosing life. And to choose to love and to care for herself while also loving and caring for other people. Invincible as a series, whether in comic or cartoon form, is full of people like that. Mark, Eve, Amber as well, even Rex and Amanda, for example. Donald, the guy with the glasses, if you don't know who I'm talking about, the helper to Cecil, he realizes what he's thrown away in his effort to try to heal from past trauma, and he stays sane even through the process of trying to recontextualize it and accept it and keep his memories. Doug, the college kid, the one that was turned into one of those creatures, he goes through having to struggle to understand what his self-identity is after he was salvaged like a machine. He doesn't know how much of him is still him, and he heals from it. Even fucking Abraham Lincoln adapts to the trauma of living forever in a world of people who keep vanishing around him. Imagine lots of people like, oh, I wish I could live forever. I'd see the end of the universe. And it's always like people in their 20s that say things like this. You don't want to. Even if you were guaranteed that all the people that you love would live the same amount of time, you probably still wouldn't want to. It is deeply traumatic to have to see your entire grounding as a person slowly fall away over the years. It gets really rough. But he realizes after what happens with Kate, this is the one person that I felt a connection to. And I think the reason why he hadn't been having problems up until then is because he just kept going. And a lot of people are like this. They just keep going. They're not really bothered by anything because they don't have time to stop and think and process about what's happening with them and who they are. They're just focused on their job, or they're focused on raising a kid. They're not really processing anything else. And then the moment that they lose that, then they're forced to reevaluate who they are and what their identity is, and then they realize that they have nothing. So he goes through that and realizes this one person that for a speck of a moment is someone that he actually identified with and actually understood him. That's what awakens that in him, and whenever he loses it, it is devastating. But without getting, because this hasn't really happened yet, but without giving too much away, he does heal. And they go on with life as a result. And there's more to him as a character and so on. I'm not going to get into this, a lot of spoilers. But this is what Invincible is. It's about humanity, the nature of self-care, and how you adapt to an insane world through this fictional lens of heroes that make mistakes all the time. It also has characters that feel like people that you'd want to be friends with in real life, or people that you know, or even people that are like you, like yourself. So here at the end of this incredibly long video, and I'm sure some of you are very excited to see something this long, the funny thing is this drawing did not take me very long at all. It was only instead of it being 12 hours like it usually is, I think it was only like 5 or something. So it's kind of funny that I'm having to stretch the video this long. This was an attempt to try to record the audio before I did the video processing, so I didn't have to worry about running out of space at the tail end. And this is what happens as a result. I just keep talking and talking. But here at the end of this video, think back to those hunter-gatherers sitting around a fire. They're, telling each other stories. Why are you telling us this? Ask that question again. The clear answer with Invincible is because these are issues we all think about every single day. Issues relating to family and friends, interconnectivity, self-agency, and so on. Good fiction is about self-evaluation as people and even as a species. It doesn't have to be mopey or depressing or full of Tom Paris twists and turns for no reason. It has to be important, relatable, and interesting. So the answer to why are you telling me this should always be because I'm trying to help. People like Debbie nail that. So that is why Invincible is succeeding. The original comic has some problems with that from time to time. It's not perfect or anything, and the cartoon's not going to be perfect either. Nothing is ever going to be 100% perfect. That's part of why you create things. It's the shaping of something that matters more than the end result most of the time. But the show direction really has only had minor issues, I would contend. It is a really great show. Not the best show in the history of the universe, but it is a great show. Go watch it. And supply Amazon with the means to continue abusing more underprivileged people. Whee! Anyways. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.